Every club.
Every day.
The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Chelsea podcast. It is also the Daily Brighton podcast today, as we are joined by Richard from the Daily Brighton team. Rich, how are you doing?
Yeah, looking forward to this Saturday, boys. Looking back to see the people who actually pay all of our wages.
Yes, we'll discuss that a bit. The amount of money that's changed hands in and the rivalry, I suggest, I'd say as well. Matt, how are you doing today? Matt's joining me for Daily Chelsea as well.
Yeah, very well, thanks, Jake. Great to be here as always. And yeah, it's going to be a feisty game ahead this weekend, I think.
100%, and we'll start. I suppose we'll start a bit with that, and Brighton and Chelsea have quite a detailed history now, which is not something you could say maybe five years ago even. Money has changed hands between Brighton and Chelsea for managers, players, and the such. Brighton, I think Rich would probably agree, that have done quite well out of some of those deals. He gives a big smile and a big nod. It's made for now some interesting matchups, because obviously from the outside looking in, Rich, I think that a lot of fans would say that Brighton just seems to be able to easily replace these players with more quality players, and that sort of seems to be the working system for you at the moment. And sort of coming on to that, obviously you had a couple of signings in the summer, a couple of outgoings as well. One that was interesting, I think you had an ex-Chelsea player, Billy Gilmore, exited. So I think what me and Matt would be interested to hear is, how have Brighton started this season? How have, has there been any particular players who have been playing very well for you? Any players that have not been living up to your expectations yet? And how do you think that you just started the season in general?
Yeah, well, look, you spoke about transfers and spending money there. I think one of the biggest issues for why Roberto De Zerbi left Brighton at the end of last season was he felt that Brighton weren't going to spend enough money. Perhaps it was players he wanted himself, but Brighton then did what they never really do, and they actually spent 200 million on a whole host of new players. But we've been quite clever in bringing them in slowly, bringing them at the right time, and we have had a really good start to the season. We started with a good win against Everton. We got the draw against Arsenal. The last two games have been a little bit disappointing in the league. The 0-0 draw against Ipswich, you feel on paper that's one you want to get 3 points. Nottingham Forest, they did well to fight back. And we did well to fight back from going from a goal down to then lead 2-1 to then draw 2-2. And there is a lot of optimism in the place, because we are slowly bedding in these new players and they're slowly kind of getting into the side. We're not quite so sure how all of them are going to, whether all of them are actually going to pay off. I'm not convinced yet with Jorginho Ruta. Only made 2 starts the last 2 games, but he hasn't kind of wowed me. While the standout players are, João Pedro looks really up for it at the moment. Unfortunately for us, fortunate for you, he's out for Saturday's game. I think that's a really big blow for us. Danny Welbeck. Danny Welbeck is on fire. It is the renaissance of Danny Welbeck. He scored 3 goals, his first ever free kick.
Yeah.
At last, someone took the free kicks off Lewis Dunk. I don't know what was going on there. But Welbeck scored a worldie from a free kick. He's also got an assist. And what I'm also really looking forward to ahead of Saturday, he scored 3 goals in his last 4 games against Chelsea. Wow. So Welbeck is definitely one to keep an eye out on. The rest will probably pick up as we go through this podcast. But yeah, the two forwards, Welbeck and João Pedro, have been mightily impressive to start the season.
Nice.
And what do you think, Rich? What do you think has changed? Obviously, you've got a younger manager now, and I suppose that's brought new ideas. I think. Matt, let me ask you quickly. What did you think of Brighton's season overall last season? Do you think that they end up doing well in the end? I thought they were quite, from the outside looking in, Rich, I'd say you're probably quite inconsistent last season in the end under De Zerbi.
I mean, if you look at we're only 5 games in of this season. If you compare it to last season, Brighton had won 4 and only lost 1. So they actually had made a better start last season compared to this. and they were high flying. But yeah, they definitely petered out last season. And I think when De Zerbi left, it wasn't really a surprise. It was, I mean, in some ways, it was a bit surprised because he was a really strong manager. But I think just the way the season ended, it was kind of clear that they've had a mutual agreement of something's not quite working here, or this isn't working anymore. So I wasn't really surprised that De Zerbi left. Obviously, they've given a great break to Hosella, the new young coach for Brighton, and he started fantastically. But he does seem to have a similar style to De Zerbi. But Rich, can you pinpoint anything in particular that's really different with his style?
Well, yeah. Where Brighton under De Zerbi, they'd very much get the centre-backs to tread on the ball, to bait the forwards towards them, and then they'd always look to play it through the middle. I've never seen anything like it, where the fullbacks were completely ignored at all times. The two centre-halves always had to look for two pivot players. Brighton this season don't do that as much. Yes, they want to get the ball forward. They only use one pivot in Weaver or Belieber, as it's been in the last few games. And then they have some of the more attacking players drop a little bit deeper, and they're not afraid to play it out to the fullbacks. So it feels like there's a bit more flexibility, a bit more variability in our passages play going forward. And I would say there's a lot more of just getting the ball to the wingers and let the wingers really attack. Matoma's made a good return, having missed most of last season out with injury. Minte, he looked really good in pre-season. He started all right, getting an assist against Everton. He's quick, he's direct, hasn't yet to really deliver on the final ball or getting a goal. I think if he can get a goal soon, then he'll be a real danger. But we've got Simon Adingra as well, who is a really good player and dangerous. And, I was at the Brighton-Chelsea game last year where Chelsea won 3-2. And Brighton were missing those dynamic wingers. We had Buonanotte. He came in from the right onto the left, scored with his left foot, a really good goal. But we didn't have those ones who could really push your fullbacks backwards. And we've got that this time with the likes of Mitoma, Adingra and Minte. So I think they're some of the key differences. But when you talk about last season and how we did, I'll be honest, our season, as I've said before, ended on March the 7th. When we got smashed by Roma, because that was the day where it felt to me that De Zerbi just gave up. All the games after that just felt slightly pointless. We were on the beach, and there was where he had the passion on the sidelines. It just didn't exist anymore.
Interesting. It was from the outside looking in. It was sort of like, I thought De Zerbi obviously had started really well, like Matt had said, and it sort of like that you'd be battling for those sort of top six places. Like you'd really shown that quality, which was interesting to see how you then sort of push down a little bit. But obviously that happens with European football, and that's something Chelsea needs to be wary of this season as well. Although hopefully with our squad size we're all right. We've got a few players in at Cobham, I think, spare. Maybe he's just kicking around. So. Yeah, it's going to be interesting on Saturday, because I think you're talking, as you're saying, Richard, you've got some better wide players now, and obviously our system has changed a little bit, that we could really be sort of hammered in by those sort of wide players being, having that quality come up against us, especially if we did sort of see, I don't know if you know that, Rich, but for the last couple of games we've not had a right back. We've been playing with a centre back at right back. It's been either Dizazi or I think Fofana played there in the last game. We did see Gusto come back for, he played the first half on Tuesday in our 5-0 win. Hopefully that was just to get him up to fitness, and we will have a right back for Sir.
He's a right back, but is he a good right back?
Who, Gusto? Yeah, he's very good. I think he definitely favours the attacking side more than the defending side, but he's very robust defensively as well. I think, as long as he doesn't get overloaded, as in like if the only part of his game where he's not that good is where teams that use an overload against him, he doesn't really know defensively where to be.
That could be a problem on Saturday, because Estepinian's back. He isn't back to the top form he was when he first joined us to replace Cucurella, but he is back in the side, and him and Mitoma, when they can get going, they're really good on that left-hand side.
I mean, Matt, what do you think about Gusto for us so far?
I mean, I think he's been fantastic. I mean, last season he was arguably, if Cole Palmer wasn't there, he'd be up there with Player of the Season. I think just the way that he filled in for Reece James, and if Jackson had the kind of form he started this season with last season, I'm sure Gusto would have had quite a few more assists, because the amount of times he put it on a plate for him or other players, he was fantastic. So, but then sort of, I think I understand the point on the overload, but the way Maresca sets up our team and the way he demands so much from the whole team and individuals as a whole, whoever's playing on that right wing, whether it's Madueke or Neto, they're going to have to track back. They're going to have to track Estepina or Matoma or whoever it is. So I wouldn't necessarily be worried about your fullbacks and your wingers like doubling up, because I would fully expect Enzo to tell us, the wingers that you've got to track back. Because we know that's the way you're going to play, and if they're not going to track back, they're going to get subbed off. It's pretty simple.
You got enough players to do that.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be interesting to see how the styles and the tactics compare, which is something we'll cover after our quick break. We'll also discuss and make some predictions for the game on Saturday as well. See you shortly. This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day. And we are back on the Daily Chelsea podcast. It is, of course, Crossover Thursday, and we are joined by Rich from Brighton. And we are also joined by my co-host Matt as well. We were discussing before the break sort of tactically how we're both going to compare. Obviously, this is going to be a completely different game to last season. Two completely different managers, and a few new signings sprinkled in there for both teams as well. But just before we move on to sort of what tactics we can expect from both managers, who would you say has been your standout player so far, Rich, in this current season? And has it been one of your new signings?
I think I mentioned earlier, Welbeck has probably been the standout player so far. He's looked really good. Joao Pedro as well, unfortunately out for Saturday. And then, the others have been, like, Dunk is always pretty consistent. Van Hecker looks really good this year. He's finally got a call up to the Dutch international side. He got the assist for the header for Jack Hinchelwood on Sunday against Nottingham Forest. But he's strong, he's calm, he's composed. And, if you didn't have a player who looks completely different to the player you had last season in Nicholas Jackson, I wouldn't be quite so worried. But what has happened to that bloke?
Yeah, I mean, Matt, maybe do you want to discuss a little bit of what we've seen from Nicholas Jackson this season?
Oh, I mean, he's been on fire, hasn't he? He's been almost like a completely different player. I think as well, it's something that I think Enzo has just brought to the club. He's brought a lot of love. He's brought a lot of better man management of every player. And he's brought a proper system that each player knows their role. And I think for a player like Jackson, he really needs that, like, specific coaching. I think, if we look at the game against West Ham last week, both of his goals were pretty quick and pretty instinctual, really, in terms of just to especially for his second one, just to take a touch and then shoot. And he didn't really have to think too much. I think when you give him the time and space to really think about so many different options, that's when he kind of almost freezes and doesn't know quite what to do, or just panics. Whereas because he's had really clear instruction from Maresca about what he needs to do and how he'll link in with the team, I think that's just what he's really needed. And because he's able to see results and get in the right positions, that then just boosts his confidence, and then he's just a lot more clinical. And I just don't think we had that under Pochettino last season. On top of that, sort of, all the players around him have stepped up. So, Madueke has been better this season. Now we've got Sancho in, he's high-flying, also Felix and Neto. They're amazing signings. And Cole Palmer's Cole Palmer, who's always going to find him. So I think it's predominantly just a massive confidence boost for him. And yeah, I think he's going to be a real threat for us on the weekend.
Yeah, I think it's I think Rich, you sent over before. Is Jackson someone maybe you should worry about? And I think at the moment, yes. Like he's. It's not only that he's showing his quality now, but he's also keeping someone like Nkunku out of the team, who just on Tuesday scored a hat trick. I know it was only against Barrow, but he's been doing quite well in every appearance that he's had, and he's not really had a sniff in the first team in Premier League games because of how well Jackson has been performing, and it's really great to see for Chelsea fans, because obviously we've not really had a striker we can be excited about for a while, but Jackson is starting to show that for us, and he's definitely going to be a bit of a presence on Saturday. What I am worried about, however, is obviously you said that Van Hecker has obviously had a really good season so far. Dunk also. I've not seen too many Brighton games, but Dunk seems to be doing well in terms of like his average FOTMOB score and that sort of thing. Your centre backs seem to be doing quite well, and your defence in general seems to be holding up pretty decently. Do you expect us to be able to get many shots off against you? Do you think we'll have enough time to? I suppose, Matt, I think you'll probably agree with me on this. Is that Chelsea have changed from Pochettino last season, where we sort of attacked when we could, whenever we could, to now we have a very slow build up, and if we don't see a player open, 3 or 4 meters away from us, when we're in the final third of the pitch, that ball's going backwards and backwards, and we're going to just start again and start again and start again. Do you think that Brighton will allow us the time to do that on Saturday, or are you going to press us up front? Are you going to make this a bit more hot on us and possibly force us into some mistakes?
So we're defensively tighter this season than we were under De Zerbi. Just from what I've been seeing, I can't compare the numbers, but we're definitely more interested in keeping clean sheets under like De Zerbi. It was more like, if you score 3, we'll score 4. That was more of the mentality. We just want to attack. We want to get the ball forward. And Herzler does want to get the ball forward. He does appreciate us getting the ball up to the wingers and attacking quite quickly, more so than, by the sounds of it, Maresca. But he's very keen on clean sheets. He's very keen on us trying to be defensively solid. Dunk has been good. Dunk has been great every year we've been in the Premier League. I don't think he's as quick as he once was, but his distribution's great, and his leadership at the back for us, alongside Van Hecker, and with now Verbruggen as our regular keeper, that's a good trio. And then at fullback, we've become a little bit more, we've become less adventurous at fullback. Veltman isn't a player who's going to get up and down the touchline. He's going to be really solid for us. We've been playing Hinchelwood at left back when Estepinian has been out injured. Estepinian's back, so he will give us a bit more of an attack on the left-hand side. But we're much more interested in being slightly tighter, and then we normally have holding defensive midfield, which has been Belieber. Weef has been brought in, he looks like a Rolls Royce of a player. He's 6'2", so it looks a bit weird of him being central midfield, a bit like when you see like Sander Berger in midfield. You're like, this guy should be a number 9 or a number 5, certainly not in the middle of midfield. But he's really good on the ball. He's really good at just dropping that shoulder and turning and bringing the ball forward for us. Kind of glides around the pitch. I'm really excited about what he could do for us this season. He's missed the last few games through injury. Belieber's been in, and Belieber was kind of brought in when you guys signed Caicedo for us, and he was a bit young, he was a bit raw, he's athletic, he's decent on the ball, he scored a good goal against Wolves for us, but he reminds me more of Basuma than he necessarily does Caicedo. Caicedo for us was just so tenacious. If he lost the ball, he'd win it back immediately. He'd cover ground, he'd tackle, and clearly a good all-round footballer, but I think Basuma was slightly a better player. And I see a bit more of that Belieber, but Belieber's still got a mistake in him. Like, I went to Brighton away at Liverpool a few years ago in Basuma's first season for us, and he gave away a penalty. We lost 1-0, and it was just that little bit of inexperience, and that's where we're with Belieber. He gave away the penalty against Nottingham Forest, and he's got those mistakes in him. And because Hertzler likes to play just one kind of defensive midfielder, I don't think he's going to be brave enough or will want to play games where we play Weaver and Belieber, which is a shame because I think Belieber could be quite good. So with that in mind, we're only really going to have one defensive midfielder against you. So I think we will give you opportunities to shoot. I think we will give you opportunities to score, because while we have been a little bit more defensive and Hertzler wants us to be more defensive, we haven't kept that many clean sheets, and we're still giving other teams opportunities. And I think Hertzler's still working on that, and maybe in a few weeks, a few months, it'll improve, but I don't think it's ready for Saturday.
Interesting. It seems like we're definitely going to have some players to think about and some tough tactical opposition. Matt, do you think that Maresca is going to have to make many tactical changes for Brighton on Saturday, or do you think it'll be more of the same of how we've seen in our first few games this season?
Yeah, I think our build-up will be similar, but I think there may be just more of an emphasis on going man for man in terms of the marking, just because obviously they like to do a similar slow build-up, and he'll probably be quite hot on whoever's playing at wing to be willing to track back. And yeah, us really focusing on defending as a whole and then attacking as a whole. So I do think it will be quite similar, but Maresca will definitely be aware of the threat Brighton holds and what they can do on the break. And I mean, it's a blessing that João Pedro is not in the team for Brighton. But then again, like Rich said, Welbeck has been brilliant. He's almost, having his amazing years at the end of his career for Brighton. So I think he'll be the main threat actually for Brighton that we need to watch out for. But I don't expect too much to change from Maresca.
Fair enough. And yeah, you mentioned Welbeck there. He has a particularly good record in London when it comes to scoring goals. So something our centre-backs, defenders are going to have to be quite wary of. We will discuss some predictions, the scoreline and the lineups when we come back from this very quick break. See you in a second. Do you have a story to tell that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story? It might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform we use here at Global Sports Podcast Network. Zencastr makes it easy to start a high-quality podcast built for growth from day one. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes ums, ahs, your nose, and 22 other speech patterns, Zencastr makes it super easy to start a podcast that sounds great. Ready to tell your story? Check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. And we are back on Daily Chelsea, and of course it is crossover Thursday with the Daily Brighton team as well. Rich and Matt both join me, Matt from Chelsea, Rich from Brighton, and it's come to the final third of our podcast, which means predictions, guys. What do we think is going to be the result on Saturday, and which players are going to provide the goals, which players are going to be starting? Matt, let's start with you. We had quite a nice lineup in our game against West Ham, and a nice result that followed that as well. Do you see many changes coming from that game, that lineup against West Ham? Considering we had 11 changes for our midweek game, so everyone's sort of should be rested, besides Gusto, who might be coming back for us. Do you see any lineup changes for us against Brighton at home?
I think it will be the same team against West Ham, but we'll just have Gusto come in at right back, and we will probably have Colwill and Fofana at centre back, just because that's been our tried and trusted so far. Although I did think Tosin was fantastic against West Ham and has that extra height compared to Fofana. So I would love to see Tosin in the starting 11, but I think Maresca will set up with Sanchez, Cucurella, Colwill, Fofana and Gusto at the back. And then the same 6 against West Ham. So Caicedo, Enzo, Sancho, Palmer, Madueke, and then Jackson up top, just because that's probably as close to our starting 11 as that we've got. And I don't think he'll want to ruffle too many feathers. We'll probably see introductions of Neto and Felix as the game goes on, potentially Tosin or Disasi coming on in the middle. Maybe even Casadei coming in for the midfield, depending on how the game goes and whether we need to shut up shop a bit more. So that's what I think the lineup's going to be. And despite that, and despite how successful we were against West Ham in terms of keeping a clean sheet, I think it's going to be a really high-scoring game, and I think it's going to be a repeat of last season. It's going to be 3-2 to Chelsea.
Oh, interesting. And just also to mention something we didn't discuss too much actually about the starting players for Chelsea. You discussed Sanchez, Cucurella, Colwill, and Caicedo there, Matt. Obviously, when this fixture comes around, there are a few ex-Brighton players who end up playing against their club. Matt, what's been your thoughts so far on those on overall, not just this season, on the signings that we've made from Brighton? Do you think most of them are living up to their potential now?
Yeah, I mean, it's how you view it and compared to the fee, because we paid 62 million for Cucurella, we paid 100 million for Caicedo, potentially 15 million more, depending on whatever extras, or add-ons that he completes. But both those players have completely changed our first team. Admittedly, both of them were pretty shaky in their first season. Cucurella definitely, but I can kind of see that down to it just being a turbulent year when he signed for us. And when we had Graham Potter, he didn't really know what he was doing for us. And so it was just a really tough time. I definitely think they're both good value for what they've brought to the team and their level. I mean, Cucurella, he's in the Spanish national team. That's huge. Caicedo, yeah, he cost a lot of money, but if we take into context, everyone wanted him when we bought him. Liverpool were right there with us, bidding like tit for tat, and he could have gone there for 111. And then everyone could have been, pointing the finger at Liverpool last season, saying Caicedo's all this money, he's not really living up to it after his first season. But we've got to remember these things take time, and Caicedo's definitely bought into the project, just like Cucurella. They're on long-term contracts, and so I think we'll see their full value when they come to end their contracts and leave Chelsea. So yeah, definitely well worth it. We're probably the only club that could really go for it, apart from City, to get both of them with the funds that we have. Maybe Liverpool if they really wanted to splash the cash. But I think it's been brilliant. And I mean, don't forget, we've taken plenty of their backroom staff as well. Not just Graham Potter in the manager, but we've taken Billy Reid, an assistant coach, plenty of goalkeeper coaches, recruitment specialists, things like that. So yeah, it's not just the players that Chelsea have been looking after. And I guess just quickly, Rich, on that, does that fuel a lot of sort of hatred from Brighton towards Chelsea? I just remember in particular when we lost 4-1 at Brighton and Potter was getting so much stick from the Brighton fans. I didn't really get it, because at that time, naturally, that's a step up. But they seem to be loving the fact that he was like suffering. Is there a reason that they just thought he shouldn't have left?
So I can't really pinpoint the reason, because I'm not really in that camp. But yeah, there is quite a bit of bitterness, it feels like, between Chelsea and Brighton fans. For me, I loved Cucurella as a player at the club. I loved Caicedo, and I can see Brighton fans don't want to lose those type of players. But when a big top six or traditional top six club calls and they pay like silly money, it's monopoly money, like you got to take it. 100 million for Caicedo. Love Caicedo, but at 21 years of age, 100 million, you're going to steal that. Cucurella, 60 million was brilliant for us. You're going to steal that money and bring in Estepinian, who's just been just as good for us. So I think the one which hurt, like Potter going, I think there was a bit of frustration because Potter was very up and down with Brighton. He'd go through a run of good wins and then go through a run of bad defeats. I personally wasn't the biggest fan of his football. I found it very passive. It would just be centre back to right back to centre back, and just passing across the defence. And then when they make one pass through to the midfield, he'd play it back to the defence, and they'd just do the same again. And it just used to bore the hell out of me. But he was on a bit of a winning run. You guys took him. The one that hurt a lot of people was Bruno going with him, because everyone understood that Potter would leave and would take his backroom staff. But I think a lot of people thought, because Bruno kind of just joined the Brighton backroom staff when he ended his career rather than Potter's backroom staff, he would kind of stay in that role for the next kind of manager. But when he went to Chelsea, it really upset people, which is such a shame, because he was such beloved, and that kind of still hurts the Brighton fans. So there will be a lot of needle, particularly at Cucurella for some reason. I think he gets it the worst, more than, say, Sanchez, more than Caicedo. There's just a real dislike of Cucurella, which is weird, because Caicedo, he wrote a post on Instagram in the January before he left us to thank the Brighton fans when he thought he was going to Arsenal. Like, he was that desperate to leave. He'd already written the post before he signed a contract, and yet he gets it. There'll be boos, and it will add a little bit of extra needle. But I'm more interested in what players of ours you're going to be looking at next.
I was going to say, my next question, Rich, was going to be, what would be the starting 11 for Brighton on Saturday? But also remember that any players you name, the Athletic will probably be linking as a January transfer window purchase for us. So, but no, moving on to the lineup. Do you expect? I mean, you put out quite a solid team against Forest, and as you mentioned, Estepinian was back for you as well, which is quite important. Do you expect many changes from that lineup against Forest?
I think it'll be very similar. I suspect the keeper and defence will stay the same, so that'll be Verbruggen, Veltman, Van Hecke, Duncan, Estepinian. I wonder if he's going to take out Belieber and play Weaver. I think he's just his preferred central midfielder, and I think if he's fit, I think that giving away that penalty might just cost him, and I think he might put Belieber on the bench. I think Ayari's back, but I don't think Ayari's quite the player for Brighton to be pushing to get into the first team. Milner's not back, so I think with Hinshelwood getting his goal and looking all right in midfield, I think he'll keep his place. Matoma will start. It's between Adingra and Minte, but I think Adingra will probably just keep his place for the minute ahead of Minte. And then Welbeck will play up front, and it's just whether he persists with Ruta, and I'm just not quite convinced he's the man right now. And so, personally speaking, when Brighton won 2-1, not last season, the season before at Stamford Bridge, when Enciso scored that wonder goal, I don't want to see Enciso. He's not really been back at it since his injury yet. It'd be a good player to have on the bench, but I'd quite like to see Ferguson. Maybe Ferguson plays a bit further forward. Welbeck just drops a little bit deeper off him. Ferguson played really well in that 2-1 win 18 months ago, or however long it was. And he returned in the game against Wolves, and he didn't score, but he looked bright. He looked sharp, and he's not scored for a long time. But I think if he can get a few starts, maybe get a goal, I think his confidence can rebuild, because there's a player there. So I don't think he's going to make that change. I think he's going to stick with Ruta, but I'd quite like to see Ferguson.
Interesting. Okay, it's Ferguson. Obviously, as we've just spoken about, was another player we were linked with after he performed really well against us.
Yeah.
And obviously, strikers are quite easy to link with Chelsea, although a little bit less so these days. Long may it continue. And Rich, what's your score prediction for Saturday as well?
I think we're going to get another draw. I think it could go either way. In all honesty, I don't think either side have really worked out what their form is. Like we're unbeaten, but they haven't been the best of kind of draws. You guys look like you can thrash someone one week, but then lose the next week. So it could be a high-scoring draw. I think Brighton are really keen to stop shipping the goals in, so I'm going to go with 1-1.
Interesting. Okay, I'm sort of in between you both. I think a 2-1 to Chelsea. The only reason I think we're both quite evenly matched. The reason I think that we might win is just we just seem to be riding a bit of a wave at the moment. Like we obviously lost our first game against City. We did have a draw against Palace in the last few games as well. But besides that, we're the second highest scoring team in the league. Our players are just there's a real confidence about us right now, and I think the players are starting to feel it. Maresca's starting to feel it, and hopefully for the first time this season, all of the home fans can feel it. Because I think that's going to be something that's could possibly harm us slightly this Sunday. Is that our home atmosphere has not been that good so far. Not as in it's been like constant boos and stuff like that, but if Chelsea start getting under the cosh a little bit, then the fans can turn quick and they can start asking for getting on top of the players quite quickly. And players have spoken about that as well. And I'm hoping now that we've been on a good run of games, hopefully that changes for us a bit that on Saturday, as we could do with that 12th man. We've not really had that for a while, to be honest. So all predicting a few goals in the game for Saturday as well. It's been fantastic on Crossover Thursday. I've been joined by Rich from the Daily Brighton podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, Rich.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. Let's see if we're as cordial come 5 o'clock on Saturday.
Probably not. But well. Matt, it's been fantastic to have you with me as well, my co-host from Daily Chelsea.
Yeah, brilliant to be here, guys. And Rich, good luck.
Yeah,
thank you.
Honestly, good luck to you, Rich. But hopefully Chelsea absolutely smash you. Anyway, thank you guys both for joining us, and thank you for listening. We are the Global Sports Podcast Network. This has been the Crossover Thursday episode, which happens every week. We cover all 20 Premier League clubs, and when both clubs play each other, you will get a crossover episode. Chelsea play Brighton on Saturday at 3 p.m. And we will be doing a forecast Friday for that on the on the Daily Chelsea Network as well, as will Brighton, I imagine. So fantastic! Thank you both for joining me, and we will see you soon.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.